So let's take a quick look at today's lineup. So with us today, we're pleased to have Tim Willard. Tim is the founding partner at Navigate, joining us all the way from Cape Town, South Africa. Navigate has been around since 2011. It's a culture, strategy, and scale agency that helps leaders and their teams navigate change intentionally. So we'll give Tim a chance to share a bit more here in just a few moments so you can learn more about Tim and the work that Navigate is up to. And then last but not least, we're going to hear from Ruud Janssen. Ruud is co-founder and managing partner rather, at the Event Design Collective in Basel, Switzerland. For those of you who aren't aware of Event Design Collective, they enable teams to systematically design innovative events using their event canvas that they came up with. It's available as a template in MURAL, and it's used by teams around the world to design better and more effective events in less time. So why don't we get started with a quick warm-up activity. So I can tell from looking in the Zoom chat that we've got people here from all over the world. What I'd like to ask you to do is grab one of these black push pins just above the map and drop it right on your current location. So wherever you happen to be joining us from today. Okay, so I've just summoned everyone. Give you a minute or so to grab one of those push pins and plot it wherever you happen to be. Looks like we've got a number of people from Northern and Western Europe. Got people from the West Coast of the United States, some people from the Northeast, US. South Africa is well represented. Got somebody joining us from India. Fantastic. So warm-up activities like this, if you find yourself in a situation where you're working with maybe a client who you wouldn't consider to be digitally mature, they haven't maybe spent a whole lot of time in MURAL, a fun warm-up activity like this is a good way to give people an easy way to get started using MURAL, right? Just by having to copy and paste something or drag and drop something, an object. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll go to the icons menu over on the left-hand side and invite people to pick an icon that represents themselves and drop it onto a map. So definitely want to encourage you to try out some warm-up activities if that's not something that you've baked into your practice thus far. Okay, so let's get started with the Partner Jam. This is what you're all here for. And as I mentioned, we're really excited to have two guests with us today who have some incredible experiences to share. So without any further ado, let's jump in. So I'm going to set the timer for about 15 minutes. So let me do that. I'm going to share my screen as well in Zoom. Okay, so I'm setting my timer. Okay, so Tim, I shared just a little bit about you in opening remarks, gave a quick intro, but would love to hear, maybe spend a minute or so, share a little bit more about you and what you're up to at Navigate.
Sure, Pete. Thanks very much for the opportunity. Yeah, I think your introduction set it up really neatly. I'm a founding partner of Navigate, founded in 2011. And we've evolved into a boutique management consultancy, which started off as a strategic facilitation agency We work with leaders and their teams in terms of driving and supporting initiatives around culture, strategy, and growth, or what we refer to as scale. And yeah, in essence, if we can accelerate positive change, that's really when we've done our best work. So, and I'm grateful for the extra time. Hopefully I will get it done in 10, but if I go over, that's great. Thank you very much for that in advance.
Great, Tim. So I will stop sharing and invite you to share your screen so we can jump right in.
Cool. Do that right now. Right, and it should be coming up if bandwidth is helping us. Hello from Cape Town in South Africa. And thank you in advance for the team at MURAL allowing me this opportunity to share some of the work that I've done using MURAL in my Navigate practice. As we've already covered off now twice, essentially this is the nature of what we do. But I think it's quite important to mention right up front that this has all been quite significantly, let's say, evolved very rapidly in the last 8 months here in Cape Town. As I think a lot of people's practices around the world have evolved as the onset of COVID has taken over. And so we've really ramped up our activity, which is why I included at the bottom of that visual, the intersection of culture, strategy, and scale, the essential ingredient of MURAL, because without MURAL, we can't actually do some of the things that we need to be doing now. We've had to figure out quite rapidly how we can deploy the nature that of the work we used to do on-site and with client off-site in a virtual way. We prefer Zoom and Microsoft Teams as our platforms, but we'll use anything in terms of the virtual platform from a communication point of view. MURAL is our absolute go-to space for the visual collaboration. It feels like a lifetime away since March 2020 when COVID arrived. But in actual fact, I've been around the MURAL application for quite a number of years. I remember when it was actually hosted at MURAL some time ago. But I became a partner collaborator in the middle of last year. I mean, it's been quite amazing as I've used the tool, and then from the beginning of this year, started to use it even more. I think in the brief, Stefan, you and Pete, you and Stefan basically asked me to call out client ahas, but it would be wrong for me not to talk about some of my own ahas in rapidly learning this tool. So 3 of them, which I think are really, really worthwhile, is that you'll notice, because I use MURAL in my practice daily now, I actually use it as a presentation tool for pitching and coordinating client briefings. So I make a lot of use of the outline on the right-hand side, just as a guide for presentation. I think the second real feature that I'm making lots of use of is the content library, which I know is an innovation on the left-hand side. And if you haven't, as a collaborator, got to understand how the content library can work for you, it's a must-do. It's something that I would get onto pretty quickly after this. And then the third thing, which I think you already set up the timer, I'm going to do it because I have a habit of going a little bit over. So I'm going to set myself up 8 minutes and I'm going to try and get what I need done in the next 8, if not 10 minutes. And then if there's any time over, we can have questions at the end. So let me start that timer and let's get cracking. You didn't come to hear me talk about Navigate. You came to hear me talk about my experiences with my client. But the context next is critical. In South Africa, and I noticed there are a couple of South Africans on this call, they will back me up by saying that we've had and we are still in lockdown, one of the most draconian lockdowns across the planet. On the 28th of March at 2020, at 1 minute past the hour of 12, everyone who wasn't an essential worker became a remote worker, if you could work remotely. In essence, the country went into lockdown, and some of those images are real. We had situations where people were kind of forced to stay at home, and quite serious measures if they weren't locked down, at least for the first 21 days. That lockdown continued. Now, many of my clients who I've helped with culture and strategy were concerned, and I did some scenario work with them. But one of the clients that I worked with is a client called Flow Communications. They're an ad agency. They're based in Johannesburg. I did some off-site work with them in the past. And they decided after 21 days that actually they quite enjoyed this remote work experience. And so they, out of the blue, decided that they were going to go for remote. Now, remote work in this context in South Africa is really a very new experience, and particularly within the experience of COVID, it's an absolutely novel experience. So although in the beginning they had a good experience, the reality of it is that what they forgot was that some of the things that they remembered from their old world, like their environment, was inextricably linked to their culture. And as a result, productivity started to wane. They engaged me to try and think about how they might actually be able to figure out how they could bring some of those touch points back, with no intention of ever going back to a physical environment, but maybe a hybrid environment. But at this stage, we're talking for remote. Fortunately for me, I'm quite linked into the MURAL network of power players. And I received an inspiration from Explain, who Elizabeth Hinckley from Explain ran a webinar mid-May about growing a 5-week workplace virtually. Now in the US, there's lots of experience. And so we really were able to kind of dive into this well of information that they presented, as well as some MURAL solutions. But their solutions were more geared towards individuals and not teams. Having said that, I thought there would be an opportunity for us to look at this full flow. And so I engaged Oric Wood, who's the CEO of Explain, and like a really good MURAL power play, he said, absolutely, use the tools. So I then went and set about putting together my version of what was essentially their future work environment and culture planner, which was inspired and duly noted that it was inspired by Explain. And so as you can see, it's quite a detailed MURAL canvas. I'm not going to go into the detail, but maybe just to give you some context, there really are 3 elements. The first element is to ask participants about where they were before COVID arrived in the history, so pre-March 2020. Then to talk about their historical workspace from a cultural and aspect and artifact point of view, and get them to surface out individual data points around that. With that historical scan in place, we then went and talked about the current here and now. And that was about what spaces they were currently using in their work that they were carrying forward to actually enable them to work remote, as well as new places that they were using and how they impacted, how those new places were impacted by their culture or not. And as a result of that, we would then be able to develop the future plan. And the future plan is essentially then looking at the 2 sets of data and essentially planning out how you might take the best from both the new experience and the old experience. However, the aha that I had for this specific client was the need to design a process with the ability for us to get an unbiased, discrete, rich set of data by individual participant that we could use in a MURAL. And so here's another innovation that I think we struck upon, and it leveraged off of some of the documents that came through from Explain. We just built up a capturable form, a PDF document, which we sent out almost as a survey. But the amazing part of this was it allowed us to capture this rich data to a very, very granular level. And the value of that was that I was able to then impute that and upload it into MURAL. And I'm not sure many people know about that as a process, but it's very valuable if you can do that, because the data you're able to get is then very, very vast and very granular. So the intention is not to make you dizzy by the charts here, but just to show you that there was a rich amount of data that came through. And the ability for us to color code that by participant in the exco meant that when we actually got into the process we designed post this initial phase, we were talking about individual data at a very granular level. What that meant was that it wasn't as if we were running the process at pace, but we were able to let people go away and asymmetrically work with the data, in which MURAL enables them to do perfectly. And as a result, they could then generate some really, really rich plans as a consequence. So the best way to actually show you this is to actually show you the work. But the idea is not, again, to make you dizzy. It's just to show you how amazing MURAL is as a tool in this context. What we did was, as I said, the process was phased. The first process was the brief, and they provided us the data. The second part of the process was then to ask them to get into the data that I imputed into the MURAL canvas, their canvas. And we then themed up the canvas together. This was the first time I invited the client into the canvas to actually work with the data. And as a result of that experience, they got to get a feel for how it worked in a slow and steady way. I finished the second phase of the process, and then we regrouped the following day, and they were allowed to settle the data to percolate, and they could then come together and figure out their own future plan. So they were able then to asymmetrically develop their own version of what they thought here on the right-hand side the plan might be. For me, that's a very powerful way of getting a lot of data and a lot of alignment in an asymmetric way very, very quickly compared to how I used to do things in my analog view. So acknowledging that there's a vast amount of stickies here, the purpose isn't to try and get into the detail of that. Thank you, Mr. Mural, for the reminder of 1 minute. I'll be done in 1 minute, I can promise you that. The idea is just to demonstrate that this is just a different alternative use case of using Mural in a very, very different way, in a very, very real and very relevant recent use case in the post-COVID era. To the extent that the closing comments from this specific client were that the plan of workshop was unbelievably, immensely valuable, as she says, helping them to map their way forward. So some of the lessons, let's quickly just touch on those lessons. And the lessons are, and I'm going to run over Pete by about 30 seconds if I may. The client AHAs, the learnings. Well, my sense was that based on this experience, clients just love to work with their pre-shared data in real time. So it's just another way of getting the data onto the canvas, but getting a lot of data so that they can immerse themselves in their data. My experience is that I had a much greater engagement than in the physical.
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That was me.
I know you're sharing your screen in Zoom.
Yes.
It looks like a few people are unable to see your screen. So would you mind dropping a link into the Zoom chat?
100%. I can do that right now.
Okay. And Tim, some questions have streamed in. So
Sure.
there's a question here from Andrea Hancock. Andrea asked, how did your client react to the mural? Were they able to start working in it quickly, or did you have to educate them on the use of mural? You said a little bit about that, but can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, is it Andrea? To answer your question, Andrea, my experience was that we didn't have much time to spend together as in a protracted individual workshop. We had, I was given 4 hours and I said I would like to map that out over 4 hourly sessions. So my first session was the pre-briefing where I shared with them what I wanted them to do and how I wanted them to generate the data. At that point, I introduced them to Mural and I offered them the opportunity to play with the tool, like a lot of the partners have actually shown in other sessions. I haven't gone into showing you that experience, partly because I think it's pretty simple and there's quite a few people that have got that kind of work. The second interaction was when I actually got into the affinity diagram process and we then worked together, but they were pretty ginger in terms of working with the data themselves. So where you see the pink stickies, that was essentially my work. Although I did encourage them to participate, some did, some didn't. However, where the breakthrough happened was after we did that work in the third session, where we got into reviewing what they said, that they saw in the mural, having shared with them a view-only mural, they were then able to really, really embed. And my sense is that as a consequence of that onboarding process, step by step, they've been able to actually slowly but surely build confidence. Will they be a Mural power user in time? I'd like to believe so, but right now, for the purposes of what I was trying to achieve as a consultant to them, I think they did 85%. In 20% of the time, we got 80% of what we required as an outcome.
Great, Tim. Another question has come in. How many people from the client team worked in the mural in parallel?
Yeah.
So presumably this is about like asynchronous collaboration.
Yeah. So in fact, if I go back to the actual work, there were 8 in the Exco that were involved, and that was why I gave them color coding. I haven't shown you where they worked, which was I created a color zone for each of them to work in, so that they were able to, if they wanted to have their own space, and they were each assigned a unique color. We had essentially 8 this is the exco of flow.
Okay, great. Another question has come in from Adriano. What did you find worked better to instruct / train first-time Mural user, or sorry, what did you find works better to instruct / train first-time Mural users with limited computer proficiency?
I think that's a great question. And I guess my answer to it is probably because I come at this from a strategy and culture consulting perspective, is that my role is to help them for as far as possible to get along. So in the event that they're unable to, then I take over and do the work. So my job is not to necessarily train them, but to give them the opportunity to look at training if they want to. So I draw quite heavily on the Mural content. I think that the Mural organization has a vast library of content for training. And in some instances, there's some users that get it. And in fact, in my experience, a lot of users get it intuitively, quite simply. But having said that, I guess there are situations where hardware or computer bandwidth might be an issue, and then obviously we have to then accommodate. But my sense is that, particularly in the Southern African context, things have moved along so swiftly that, 8 months ago, people really weren't Zoom proficient, and now they're running their own Zoom webinars. It's really learning by doing.
Okay. So Tim, we only have about a minute left. In our remaining time, maybe I could ask you to either share, one aha moment that just jumps out at you, or maybe one thing that you learned through like a stumble along the way that would cause you to maybe do something different next time around. Either one of those would be great.
I think so. The stumble is, and this is probably the most important piece, is that I come from 10 years of working analog and working in an environment where I have presented and facilitated using analog tools. I use a suite of stationery called Participlan. When you're in this space, you have to think digital. So in actual fact, it's a great question to ask, because my last point of the aha there for me is watch the power players and what they're doing. I call out one specific power player in voltage control. My workshops that I used to run analog, I've now reorientated them to double screen workshops, because that's the better user experience. But that's thinking digital. So in essence, you can't think analog anymore, you have to think digital. And I guess the second point, which is an advantage, and maybe I'll just leave you with this, is the impact of the lockdown in this context has forced the way we change the way we work. So I can now work with clients wherever, and that is significant to my colleagues around the world. You can be collaborating with me anytime you like, if there's a need. And similarly to my colleagues in Africa, who I know are perhaps on this call, we really should be reaching out more to each other, because the reality of it is that we can work anywhere now. This is what Mural and the tools have given us the opportunity. So the obstacle has become the way. So grateful thanks to Mural for this opportunity to explain, for the inspiration, and to all of you for listening and taking the time to hear this case. And I look forward to, if you want to know more about the specific case, by all means, we're a collaborative group. By all means, connect with me via LinkedIn or DM me directly, and we'll pick up the conversation. Thanks, Pete. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Tim. And so if you want to connect with Tim through LinkedIn, all you need to do is double click on Tim's face in the mural, and that will take you right to his LinkedIn profile. There's one question which we're gonna move on from that has come in from Alan Manowitz, asking for a bit more information about the double screen and what we mean by that. We'll touch on that at the end of the workshop. We're actually going to point you to a YouTube video that I think will answer that question much better than we can in just words. So, okay. So with that, let's pass the ball over to Ruud. Ruud, it's great to have you here with us. Maybe I'll invite you to share your screen, do a reintroduction to everybody, and then we can jump in.
Absolutely. And thank you, Tim, for setting up this invitation. I think it is it's a treat to get to hang out with 38 people from across the planet in one space, because events, and this is something that we do, events are things that change behavior, right? According to my colleague that's in Toronto, he's watching Netflix CMO on one channel, and on the other channel, he's watching this webinar. People have choice, right? And what we're noticing in events is that event owners are increasingly getting challenged, but also maybe a little bit frustrated in how they deal with events, because a lot of things have been thrown their way through not just the current crisis, but this whole digital first thinking that we're currently doing. And so what we do from our end, and I'll give you an example of how we do that with one organization, is we in 3 steps, we either teach them or work with them to apply a methodology to think about behavior change, and behavior change is the driver of value, in order to then empower their teams to be able to together create prototypes of what events can look like. And so, like you mentioned before, the methodology that we use for that is something that, and I'll share that on the screen here for a minute. If you want to find this methodology, you can go to the Mural Playmaker page. We're delighted to have recently been added to this list of playmakers. And if you scroll down, you will see a little picture like this one here, where it says Event Design Collective. And there you will find the templates that we're looking at today, right? So this is the template called the Event Canvas. It's the sheet music for events, right? So if you know what sheet music for events or sheet music for music means, then this is one way under Creative Commons that we've created a methodology to think about events and break down behavior change. And some people have told us that it's a helpful analog system to track the past, organize the present, and plan for the future. And what is, I just want to flash back one moment, if I may, Pete, here, because back in 2015, we had the opportunity with the client that we're going to be talking about in a minute to actually go to the offices of Mural at the time. And obviously this was, the core team we got to meet on site in Buenos Aires at the time. And we were doing what we do on Mural now in Mural's offices in Buenos Aires. So that was actually a lot of fun, because getting to know people is one of the hardest things that you need to do during events. Now, maybe to flip on, and if you think about events, you probably don't think about behavior change, right? Because people are like, oh, what do you mean behavior change for events? Well, one of the things that we like to do is to really study closely what happens, because show me any organization's event and I'll tell you about their culture, right? Tim was talking about culture and how you can work with organizations on that. And events are like manifestations of their culture. So this particular organization that we're looking at over here is an organization called the Internet Society. And these are the people that when they put together, first of all, let me explain who they are. So the Internet Society is an organization that that looks after the internet and makes it open and accessible for everyone. So it's actually one of our first points of contact, before even being able to access Zoom or Mural. And this is a community of 70,000 people across the planet, of individual members and chapters and people that care about the technical infrastructure of the internet and making sure that the governance of it is done properly. Now, the internet is owned by no one, but this community is a very committed community that looks at how to do this in practice. So when we start working with clients, let me just give one example of some current work that's going on, and then I'll flash back to the past. Usually the first thing we do when we get together with a team is we figure out what the scope of work is with that respective team. So typically, you start off with claiming time. When do you have the first meeting and how do you take the first steps? And the one thing that we find particularly helpful, which is not very innovative, but is a very basic calendar function, right? Where do we claim the time to actually get together? And when are the time slots that we work together in the future? And that really gives us a space to work together with that. And it sounds like somebody just pressed the buzzer on an airplane seat, which I love that tune from the actual timer on Mural, because it reminds me of the days when we were traveling, right? When we were hopping across the globe and doing this instead of clicking just our mouse buttons. But it's a very well chosen soundtrack. Thank you for that. So typically what we would do is set up a space, either a private space or a space where we could collaborate together. And in that room, you would typically have all the assets that you would use to work with that team. And now in this case, and I'm taking you back to 2015, because this is an older version of what we're currently using. But typically we would want to have the team there, just the way in that, Pete has put our LinkedIn profiles there, because I like seeing pictures of the people you're working with, and then determining what are all the things that we're going to do over time. So you get clarity about the steps that you're going to take. And in this case, we were testing the boundaries of the internet and seeing if we could turn a board meeting for 16 people into an actual global event for the full community across the planet, and do that in 24 hours. And so typically, as we did in those days, you would sit around and go through a process and analyze the stakeholders. And actually, in this case, the CEO, within, I would say, 6 months, said, I'd really like to see this event come together, because we don't have our own event. And so teams in Geneva and Washington, DC, and in Montevideo and in Singapore, in a 48-hour cycle, went on and designed for each of the respective stakeholders what this event should do for that specific stakeholder. Those things were brought together, and ultimately that turned into the narrative of that specific event. What it allowed within 48 hours is for a large group of people within that organization to contribute to the design and the story of that event and articulate what that behavior change looks like. Now let's fast forward to the next edition, which was the 25th anniversary. Let's see if we can find that one. And I love this finding feature, especially as we've been using Mural so much more intensively. You get lost on your murals because there's so many of them, right? If you're a heavy user like we are. And what I really like is this idea of having a place, handy anywhere you have it, on your iPad or on your telephone or on your laptop, to be able to work from. And so not just the sketching that we do offline, like in this case, our colleague Dennis likes to take stories and turns them into visuals, and it's really easy to share and collaborate on these visuals as well. Now that you have the drawing feature, which is something that really allows you to point out stuff and do stuff on the mural itself. But also the repository of being able to look forward and look backward is a super handy function for us, right? Because if you work on multiple projects, then ideas come up on what you could do for the next one. You want to maybe share things that have happened in this specific timeline, on the past of this event and the current state and the future state of this event. And this really functions for us as a repository, a digital repository of the thinking that we've been doing with the client over time. Let me take you to just an example here of the work that we're currently doing with them, right? So currently we're taking the same meeting that we had here in Buenos Aires, but we're designing one for all of the regions for next year as a community week. And so what we like to do is to set up a room with that team. Let me find that room for you. And I'll give you access to all of these open rooms. You'll find what we call our IKEA store of event formats, which is really nice to kind of build on, or maybe cheat a little bit if you want to see what other organizations are doing in their events. Many of them are happy to share it with you. So here again, we're the same thing. We started off with a calendar and say, okay, when do we claim time from the team to go and work on this project? And so when we claim the time, we have the regular Tuesday team meeting in which we get together and we open a design studio. And in this case, this team wasn't very familiar with using Mural. So what we like to do usually is explain, just like Tim was explaining, what it is we're going to do. So we have our normal assets like slides or some visuals. We're going to explain to them in phase one, we're going to work on this step, which is, talking about the change, creating the frame, and then prototyping solutions. Then we're actually going to have some fun and prototype various ways in which this event could happen. And then in phase three, what we're going to do is implement that perspective in a timeline over time. So what this allows you to do is to put some kind of mental picture. And I think this is the power of Mural, is creating, painting mental pictures. And we deliberately work with a mix of, just uncolored things, where here typically we would say, okay, in step one, what we're going to be doing is use this. And first, let's make sure we aggregate the ideas so we can check off that none of the ideas get in the way of our thinking as we go through the process. Then we go through the stakeholder alignment exercise, and we're going to do this. And then typically after we explain where we are in the process, just like you pointed out, Tim, we love using the outline as well here and saying, okay, let's now let's now go to, here's the team that's going to work on it. We get them to put their post-its there. We explain the time when we're going to do the different steps. And we have some explainer videos of the stuff that we're going to be doing with them. Because I think using alternations of video and actual work is also build in some relaxing moments for people to just absorb contextually what it is they're going to be working on. We use an explainer video, and then we move to that step to actually go and do that step with them, right? And typically we like to use, voiceover where we narrate to what we're actually going to be doing with them first visually. And then we actually say, okay, so now let's go to this stakeholder alignment map, for example, and we summon everybody to go to the right place, right? Just like Pete did with us in the beginning. And then we map out, who are the stakeholders, and we get them to long list, and they play around with the post-its to actually get to who to delight, what's the overarching aim. And then once we've determined that, we select each of the stakeholders. What we'd like to do also is, use analog and digital tools combined, right? So we have role cards here, but the role cards are also on the mural. So typically, whenever somebody would design with us, they would, get the facilitation kit with the book and actual tactile elements that they need in practice to actually then go and do, Tim, you mentioned explain, this is probably one of the more familiar frameworks that people use, and we use it to extract behaviors, from the before the event and after the event. And then we combine that onto an event canvas to not start with the empty canvas syndrome. And we do this for the various stakeholders, and to then ultimately get to, consolidating that into one canvas and then creating an event delta, which is the design goal. And then we actually go into prototyping mode to have them come up with multiple prototypes that they could choose from. Now, very often we also encourage them to print out PDFs of these things in big posters and hang it in their offices to reflect in analog and in digital.
Ruud, may I interject just for a moment?
Certainly.
So there's a question from one of the attendees. Have you been designing digital events or just on-premise events with the Canvas?
Yeah, great question. So there's no restriction. I mean, the restrictions is what you put into the Canvas, right? So some people have asked us, what can this pertain to? And I think, to give you an idea of that, we're happy to share with you. We have a repository here, which is kind of the beginning of what we like to call the IKEA store of event formats. And we have this gallery to give that, answer more concretely. So events come in many different shapes and forms, and especially now, hybrid and digital events, by the way, have been around for the better part of 2.5 decades. So it's nothing new. It's just new to a lot of people, right? And so what we like to think about is, how self-organizing or highly defined is a specific event, and then is it face-to-face offline, or is it remote online, or is it on any gradient in that scale? And so this repository contains formats, case studies, examples, right? So any example you click on here will give you an actual, example of that specific event and how it works in practice. And so we encourage organizations to think like this, right? You'll find that event of the Internet Society I was just speaking about, written up with video and the whole narrative. So any type of event can really be designed, whether it's live, digital, or hybrid, it doesn't really matter. Those things are just design restrictions, right? It's something you put into the design frame, and then you can work with that.
Okay, Ruud. This is great, super inspiring work here. Thank you for sharing. Just a few more questions streaming in. So this one's from Robert. He wanted to know, did you get feedback from participants about their experience with the events, and how do you fold that back in?
Yeah, so the best way we can do that, Pete, is really, and thanks for the question, is when a lot of the work we do is around training people how to do what we do. So we have a program for people to become certified event designers. And so what we've noticed when, obviously at first we thought, we normally do a 3-day live training, which we do at different places across the globe. And we give people 6 months of time to actually do the event design with their team and seed it back onto a mural, because that's how they submit it back to us for peer review. What we noticed is that after the live training, usually people had a really kind of steep learning curve to learn how to design online, or how to use what they use in post-its and posters on the wall to then go and do that digitally. And so our most recent programs in June and August were online programs. And some people that were in our live programs also joined our online programs, and they said, the learning I'm doing in 3 days online together is more intense and even deeper than, and I didn't expect that to happen, because now they've acquired the skill of being able to collaborate and design online using Mural. So the feedback loop you get there is that if I do it in real time using this tool, now I have a capacity that's different. Now, being able to design with other people or facilitate the design process, those are two different skill levels. Right? So what we've noticed is that some people find it challenging at first to facilitate a group of people and to then, allow others to design together. But that feedback loop that you were talking about, in an event like the Internet Society, we would typically design it either offline or online. Then they would go and execute the event, deliver the event, and then we would look back at the functioning of the event by creating a baseline of that event, and putting it back into a canvas to consider what the past edition was like. And so we use it perpetually. So sometimes when you have an event happening multiple times, yes, you recapture the feedback back into the mural, and that's your repository of all the data.
Great. So two last quick questions, and let's let's try to run through these as quickly as possible. This just in from Laura. Quick question: what are your favorite interactive tools in Mural?
So the really silly one that people love is the confetti, right? And that's not an interactive tool. It's more of it's a fun factor thing. But when we do our graduations or where people have a celebratory moment and we ask them to get out some drinks and cocktails and stuff, having a tongue-in-cheek moment is a lot of fun, right? In anything we do, we try to balance online and offline. So for anything that we can do on Mural, we actually ship real confetti to people to throw on their desk as well. So, I think you have to force yourself. Oh, people want to see the confetti tool. Can you show it, Pete? Yeah, that's cool. But that's a silly one. What I really like is I think the outline function is brilliant. I think the search function is brilliant. I love the drawing tool, even though I'm a clumsy drawer with my mouse, right? I think the library function is very helpful. And probably the tool I love most personally is the fact that the Noun project, icons are now like embedded into the whole thing, which allows people to express themselves visually in a much easier way. I think that's part of what I'm seeing. I don't know, Tim, what tools are what are the geek out tools for you in South Africa?
Well, I think I tend to, I run out of time, so I quite like the timer. And I call that Mr.
Timer, yeah,
I call that Mr. Mural. So, and I generally set up for at least 80% of the time that I need, and then I kind of extend it on. So that really works for me. But what I'm finding more and more is just the overall experience around working when taking a brief in Mural. It becomes a way of life. So because gathering people's data points and then creating affinity to say, is this what we're really trying to achieve, and summarizing. So basically taking disparate data, theming it together. I don't know what you call that, but that for me is a standout reason why I make use of Mural daily.
Can I add one more, maybe, Pete?
One more, and maybe for 30 seconds or so, and then we'll move on.
30 seconds. And I'll share my screen real quick. But what I've done a lot lately, which I really like, is actually using Mural to sell services, right? So by explaining what it is you're going to be doing, sketching the landscape of where they are and what they would like, and then showing what happens in the different steps of the process, right? So typically we would say, so we would begin with, doing this, for instance, the baseline of an event, and then the outcome of that would be, event design baseline, and that takes X amount of time. Or, if we do a design sprint, this is what we do in step 1 and step 2, and as a result of it, here's what you get, and this is what it looks like, right? So the people we work with love this, but the procurement departments hate it. Because they're like, no, it needs to be in written form, and it needs to fit in a table and in a spreadsheet, and otherwise it doesn't exist, right? So
that's right. It breaks the mental model of what that could be. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to start to move toward the finish line. So Ruud, Tim, thank you both so much.